Welcome, everyone, to the HeroX Innovation Leadership Speaker Series. I'm Jamie Elliott, and I'm joined today by Brad Hefford. Brad is the Chief Administrative Officer for the Town of Gander. Brad, it's really, really great to have you today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Tell me about Gander. Tell me about the background, the history, the community.
Gander's a small town by all standards. We've a community of about 12,000 people, which is probably one of the larger centers in a Newfoundland, Canada context. Newfoundland being Canada's most eastern remote region. We're an island off the northeast coast, closest point to Europe. And I guess that ties into Gander's history. So our origin began in the onset of transatlantic flight. It was first the Newfoundland airport, and in the 30s really took a huge prevalent role in World War II, with becoming the head of ferry command, the station which all planes across the North Atlantic to or from had to stop. 1959 became sort of like when the community started. So the community grew out of the airport. 1959, the Queen commissioned the airport, a new terminal building. There's a picture of her right over my left ear. And at that point, during the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s, was one of North America's most strategic locations because of its proximity to Europe and the requirement of fuel stoppage for all transatlantic flight. So we're a very young community, 75 years old, 80, depending on the incorporation dates and what have you. But we've got a unique history for the Newfoundland context. So Newfoundland as a province is very much outport fishing. That's our history. Gander itself's got a very different history than most of our neighboring communities, but directly tied to that in both economy and culture and what have you. So yeah, so I think we're a unique town. We got a lot of self pride. Got a military base, Canadian CFB military base still operates here. Yeah, so that's a key part of our history and continues to be.
And today, because HeroX, we love all things innovation, and innovation means different things to different people. I'm thinking about problem solving, understanding problems that your community has and how they solve them. What does that look like today? What does the community look like today? How is community engagement? And what does innovation look like for Gander?
Yeah, I think innovation for, I'm going to say rural Canada. I'm sure it's probably a rural phenomena beyond Canada. It's like innovation is kind of like how do you maintain a place of meaning and a place of belonging and a place of sustainability and prosperity and in sort of a global trend of urbanization over the past several decades. And that's been a real challenge for many small communities. I believe Gander has done a good job of sustaining growth, even though it might be modest growth. We have continued to grow over the last 5 census periods. We're very proud of that. Since 2001, we've gained 23% population, and we've certainly bucked the Newfoundland trend, which has, we've been plagued with outmigration, aging populations and the demographic cliff that's associated with that. But we feel we've mitigated some of that. We've reversed those trends and have kind of been a little bit of a unique model. And we hope that there's an innovative background to that. Innovation in the way we think, the way we come together as a community, the way that we, tackle problems, and certainly want to believe that it's a part of our success.
Is any of that formalized at this point? Programs or things or ways that your community can reach out and be engaged and get involved?
I think so. I mean, we've seen what we've seen is community capacity constraints have become an impediment to growth. I mean, the whole housing file, which is certainly not unique to us or Canada, or like what we've seen is the whole housing dynamic has been a real challenge when you're trying to recruit physicians, nurses, medical professionals, um, newcomers. Whenever you're trying to do that, people need a place to live, and figuring out that model around sustainable housing in the face of inflation and high costs, the convergence of affordability and meeting expectations has been a real challenge. We've done things like we've just the innovative way that we can approach it in terms of naming it. Like many municipalities over the last 5 years, we've had uh, a housing strategy. We've sort of put all of our housing pieces under the umbrella of what we call Build Up Gander, and it's part marketing, part strategy, part self promotion. It's all of those things. But I think it's like it's been a real shining star. I think in the way that we've stood out from many of our counterparts in saying we're thinking about these things differently. And sometimes the innovation is just a mindset, and it permeates from there. And I think we've started to see it translate into results. I mean, last year for us, we had 95 housing units for a small community. That's a lot. Like we were punching above our weight class there, and we're really proud of that. And we hope that it's somewhere in that is the mindset that we've approached with it as a strategy.
Well, that's great. Are there other initiatives going on you'd like to talk about? Other things bubbling up that you're excited about for the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we see the community change, the needs are evolving. I mean, we've been really thankful, and many of our seniors continue to find Gander a great place to live, access to healthcare and what have you. But as opposed to a lot of other places, like we've also seen a young, diverse population segment emerge. And with that, you start to see new needs, new challenges. So one of the things that we've kind of started at, we're very much in our infancy, but there's a whole discussion around public transit and access to services and what have you. So that's one that I think we're trying to be on the forefront of. We're certainly willing to have discussions that many of our counterparts or councils that came before the councils we've had the last recent history have been resistant to. And I think public transit is one of those areas that it can be really a transformational service if approached correctly and executed well.
Seems like it could be tough, right? You got to get it right. You have to try as hard as you can to get it right. You want to be innovative. Oftentimes, innovation means the ability to fail. I don't want to say outright failure, but to pivot, to learn, and grow from or iterate. How does that work for a municipality that is relatively young, learning to do something or implement a major infrastructural piece for the first time? What safeguards do you put in place, and what things do you do to make sure you get it as right as you can?
Yeah, I mean, I've had this discussion, and sometimes I wish there was like a municipal government think tank. I don't think they are certainly not prevalent in our part of the country, but I think it's really a risk tolerance discussion, and I think what small communities, particularly rural communities, are doing, it's very much I believe an entrepreneurial kind of sense. You're competing with each other. You're trying to stand out from your neighbors, your counterparts, and it's very much uh, a global world where small town Newfoundland is competing with people who are seeking adventure and might choose small town Montana or small town Switzerland or small town France. So I mean, so like our competition in this discussion is not only our neighbors, say 100 kilometers down the road. It's our neighbors in other parts of the world where people are choosing for different reasons. So at some point, you do have to have risk tolerance, because if you're not taking risks and trying new things and putting yourself in a position where you could fail, you're almost destined to fail anyways, because somebody out there is going to be doing it differently than you are, and they're going to succeed, and you'll be left behind. You know what I mean? And that's where your population decline becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy in some degree.
You mentioned that there's not a formalized think tank or many of them for municipalities. I am curious though, are there other municipalities that you look to or work with or kind of throw things against a wall with to see what sticks and get ideas from and share ideas with?
Absolutely. I mean, so throughout those networks are there. I mean, we have formalized associations locally as municipalities, Newfoundland and Labrador, which is a collaborative of municipalities, primarily on the political side. There's on the administrative side, there's same that elevates to like Federation of Canadian Municipalities, who really advocates for municipalities at the federal level. But there's also Canadian Association of Municipal Administrators, which is a place for like town managers, CAOs, town clerks to really become uh, a, a shared resource. It can be a very lonely place at times as a CAO in a small organization. So having that network of cohorts and trusted friends that you've met through the years becomes a really valuable resource, because sometimes we're in the trenches trying to figure it out on our own when someone's already learned those hard lessons somewhere else, and technology has connected us in ways that we could never be connected before.
That's great. What are the big things that you're excited about in the next 5-10 years for Gander?
Well, it continues to be to see the movement of young families. So we've we've been blessed. We've got sort of a core industry here. So Nav Canada is a huge crown corporation who I guess is a not for profit, sort of a complicated structure, but they run the Canadian air traffic control air navigation system, and they've got five or six main bases in Canada. Most of them are in Toronto and Vancouver and Winnipeg and Montreal and Moncton. So Gander is one of those, and we control the airspace from halfway across the Atlantic until they come into and get turned over to an interior. So it's a big, complicated. I don't know enough about, but we've got a huge, young, technical base population that have created all kinds of opportunities, and they're professional earners, and those young families are moving here, they're training here, they're settling in, and it becomes a home. And of course that becomes a snowball that kind of rolls downhill. It becomes partners or friends or relatives are saying, well, I mean, and they attract people, and the next thing you know, we've got high school population that's grown from, I mean, my two sons, one's in grade 10 and one's in grade 12. And I think when my oldest went to high school, it was 398 students, and now it's, I believe, 562. So just about a 40% increase. So you start to see those partners that come from young, dynamic energy. And that excites me, because those families have high expectations. They want fantastic recreation services, and they want beautiful attractions and amenities. And that's a challenge for a municipal administrator to compete with that, because I've lived in both settings. I've lived in a world where you struggle to keep the lights on, and I've lived in a world where you're trying to keep up with the demands for growth. And I'm not sure. I think keeping the lights on is probably easier to some degree, because you don't really have to make a lot of decisions. You just have to try to keep everything going. But managing growth is a lot more exciting.
This is great. I have a question. In those two spaces you've lived in which do you think, and there's no right or wrong answer, this is just something I've been asking as many people as I can. In which of those do you think innovation is more prevalent, shows up more?
I think there's a difference between resourcefulness and innovation.
Okay.
No doubt, like the like I and those two places were the same community at different times. So it
Wow.
was about early in my career. I left and came back. Newfoundland's history as our primary industry was cod fishing. That's where our whole history is based on. That's why settlers came here and centuries ago. And in the early 90s, they basically just froze cod fishing altogether. So it was the cod moratorium is what it was referred to. So it was the single biggest industrial layoff in Canadian history. and it just crippled our provincial sustainability for decades. So when I started my career with the town in the early 2000s, we were just coming out of that. That was in the mid 90s. And there was a little feeling of vibrancy, but like big macroeconomics was a real challenge. Out of that came huge amounts of resourcefulness. The need to survive was a pretty powerful motivator, but I'm not sure it gives you the space to be super innovative. Whereas where I think like the growth mindset is more, I think it's more of an enabler of innovation because you need to have a certain amount of capacity to enable that risk tolerance that I spoke about earlier. So I think a growth economy is much more conducive to innovation.
Love it. I love it. I love it. We get both answers, and I'm torn myself. I've as well worked in both. I think it's really interesting because to an innovator, right? If you say, is innovation a luxury? An innovator would say no, right? But when it's time to be resourceful, innovation budgets are one of the first things to go often, right? However, that resourcefulness, innovation at its basic core definition is just doing something a different way, right? To solve a problem. So you can be innovative in those times of necessity. You can be super innovative because you have to be.
You have to be. Yeah. And I think you can look
I
at like the tech ecosystem to kind of think about that. I mean, most startups need venture capital. They need room to not be profitable. To burn through money, knowing that there is potential to come out of the back end of that in a much stronger place. But a lot of entrepreneurs just struggle in that, like, they can't really be innovative or again, they're resourceful. I'm not sure they're like truly technically innovative because those one or two mom and pop shops are just trying to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so maybe it's the innovation is there when you have to be resourceful in times of necessity, but you don't get to sit around and have those what if moments, right? Because you have to be resourceful, you have to be innovative to keep the lights on. Whereas in times of surplus or in times where there's budget for those things, it's easier to create those spaces for people to try things and fail and figure it out and pivot. We got to run a challenge with the Federal Aviation Administration in the US, and it was a data science challenge for university students where they got to come up with the problem that they wanted to solve, but they had to use publicly available data sources and advanced analytic techniques to solve some problem that would help make the airspaces safer and align with FAA strategies. It was interesting because it aligns with what you said about your community and the things they're working on, but also creating that space. So the FAA created this space where they could try things out. And it was so cool at the final event. The winning team, there was a lot of data scientists and engineers and brilliant ideas, and the deliberation for who was going to be a winner was a tough meeting. But the final winners were not data scientists. They were a team of pilots. And that team of pilots got publicly available air traffic control correspondence and got some publicly available libraries for running code and tutorials, open source tutorials online about how to run that code on the data set that they had, how to manipulate the data and get it ready for running it. And they created a tool that could run a sentiment analysis on air traffic control speech to detect stress, to detect, because if your air traffic controller is in a time where they need to be resourceful and they're maybe overworked, they're tired, they might not pick up on those things as fast as a predictive model can these days. And it was just yeah, quite a cool project to be a part of.
Yeah, no. Just on continue that thought for a second. I mean, in our context, I mean, I've got some dear friends of mine who are working on some international projects through Nav Canada that the whole remote work piece has opened up and enabled, and no longer do you need to be in Ottawa or Toronto to capitalize on those bright minds. Because I've sort of said, like, my own commitment, my own love of rural Canada, rural Newfoundland, rural development, that whole piece is that sometimes it's easy to fall into the trap that smart people only live in urban centers, and I don't believe that to be the case. I think we've produced so many smart, capable people. It's just that the opportunity has not always been there, and technology has changed. I mean, it's allowed people to access it in different ways, and like you say, open source technology, and it's amazing, and is a really exciting time in that. And like I say, one of my dear friends is working on a project in that space that intrigues me, and I say, who would have thought 30 years ago that you could do that from a place like Gander?
Yeah. Right. That's great. And I think, and I hope that things like this speaker series, because we have now gotten to speak to several officials, innovation officers working in the rural parts of their area, their state, their country. And it's a similar message every time, is these people are here. They are highly intelligent and they're looking for that engagement, that stimulation. They're looking for that way to get their idea out there, or just like you said, connect, have that community and a way of sharing those ideas.
And I'll go back to the resourcefulness. I mean, the necessity of being remote, back to our history. You had no other choice in order to survive in these harsh conditions. And think about fishermen in Outport, Newfoundland, who were in small communities with no access, no very rudimentary services up until, say, the last 50 years. I mean, the history was you had to be innovative in order to survive, right? So you talk to say my grandparents' generation. I mean, those people those people were doing amazing things with very basic education, but it was in a root of necessity. They had no other choice but to be resourceful.
Indeed. Indeed. Okay. So because we get to talk to people in similar positions, in similar communities, or in communities with similar demographics, what advice would you have to other administrative officers in communities, in municipalities, for how to engage their community, how to be innovative, how to connect?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's like trusting that whole piece is an emerging skill set, that it's okay to accept that I'm not an engagement expert. I feel I'm connected to my community, that I have credibility, I have some level of trust, but we've also started to build capacity around that. We've got a communications team. We've got an engagement officer. So like we've invested in those resources and brought in expertise and given those individuals development opportunities, recognizing that like this is becoming a core part of our business, the same as accounting is a core part of our business and engineering is a core part of our business. If you're trying to do things in community that are innovative, are different, are in the spirit of change, you need to start understanding that the planning process is about like how we're having those discussions in community as well. And if people don't trust it, if people don't feel engaged, if they don't feel it's representative of their needs, it's destined to fail. The same as if it goes, a project goes bankrupt, it's going to be destined to fail. So I really think it's like recognizing it's become a core part of our business. That would be the advice that I would share. I think it's the thing that I've really benefited from in my transition period is having some people around me that I really trust that do that piece of the work extraordinarily well.
I think that's a really great angle and perspective. We had a previous speaker who said something similar, or at least the dots are connecting in my head, about when you remove silos, accountability goes up, right? And the digital transformation of the last 3 decades for communities and our interconnectedness, like we've been talking about, has removed those silos and created more transparency in a municipality and in a community about what's going on where, right? Whether you whether you like it or not, your community knows what's going on. And so then it raises accountability, which then raises the requirement for the municipal. This is all assumptions because I'm not a municipal expert, but it raises that expectation that you are going to meet certain accountability standards. You are going to be engaged to a certain degree. You are going to listen to your people and engage with them in a certain way. And it therefore requires the municipality to have those basic engagement tools in place, like you would for accounting. You know, you would have ledgers, you would have books that are opened up and audited and all those things. And what I'm hearing is it's now the same for engagement, or it's getting there with engagement, where it's a core part of the business. We have to have basic pieces in place.
100%. And I think back to when I started my career in 2002 compared to now, and I had a gap in municipal government in the middle where I was in some other organizations and came back, and some of my mentors, some people that I still see through the associations and what have you, that and I sort of I half joke and I said, you wouldn't last 10 minutes in today's world because it has changed so dramatically. Not the work, not the technical work, but the level of access and the level of demands from the public and the expectation of transparency. And that's not a bad thing, but it's a real challenge. And it's come with some growing pains. Like the discussion that's happening in the municipal sector right now is around civility and the breakdown of civility. And that's unfortunate, but it is real for our sector. I mean, thankfully I haven't had too much of it, but I know some counterparts that have just been like dragged through the mud, and it's not justified. They're hardworking people that are trying to do their job as well as they can in communities that are all caring. But I think it's a real evolution that has been primarily good. But in order to manage that and make sure it doesn't devolve into incivility, it does take a dedicated team of resources to manage that correctly. And if you don't, you'll end up in ugly places.
You mentioned something about the demand when you said people you had worked with previously or associated with previously, you wouldn't last a day here today. But you also mentioned earlier the demand of new citizens, new civilians coming to your area and what they're demanding. And it sounds like while it is a challenge, it also sounds like an opportunity, right? You're creating new recreational plans. What an opportunity to come up with something that's great and will sustain or grow in a great way.
Yep. And I mean, I'm not sure I've retained a whole lot of from my business education, but one of the things that I've gone back to and I've thought about over and over, and I've tried to use it in working with teams internally, and is this whole like Maslow's hierarchy piece where you're moving towards self actualization at the top of the pinnacle. But before you get there, you need, on a personal context, you need food and shelter and clothes, and then you need support of family and love, and and eventually you end up at the top of the pinnacle around self actualization. And I think like I see that at a community level as well. Um, at its core, we're responsible for water, sewer, waste collection, plowing the roads in Newfoundland's context as we're still in the middle of winter here. But as communities start to like separate themselves or come up with a strategy for growth, it lies in moving higher up that pinnacle. And recreation parks, these things aren't necessarily foundational to community. And some of the things that are, the social supports that are required in communities that are becoming more and more prevalent. And when would a community size of Gander have a homelessness problem? But we do. So the communities that rise to those challenges and fix that and solve the needs of their residents, I believe, are the ones that are moving higher up into that pinnacle and then become attractive places to live, attractive places to visit. and that becomes the key to your own individual success. I'm like challenging yourself to rise and elevate to meet those challenges is sometimes hard organizationally because there's things that we're not resourced to do, we're not equipped to do, we don't have social workers on staff. But if we don't try to be an active participant in solving something such as homelessness, well, we're not going to be a community that succeeds.
Right.
So
Right.
I think there's an innovation message in there somewhere as well.
There absolutely is. I think it's great. So, what advice would you have for others in your position in similar places in similar towns?
Well, and I'm not sure I'm in a spot to give a lot of advice. I'm still in my career journey as well. So, I mean, I've been around municipal government for most of my career, and I've kind of worked from sort of the front lines through the governance piece, and I'm currently sitting in the CAO role, but that's a relatively new position for me in the last couple of years. So I'm reluctant to give advice. I mean, I think I've learned some things through it, and the biggest thing is don't be afraid to take risk and challenge your community to figure out where their true desire for change is. Because if you're not trying to move the needle, then you're living with status quo, and I don't think status quo is going to be successful in the long term. I think you know but that being the proponent of change or challenging people to think differently or disrupt status quo, that can be a hard battle along the way.
All right, Brian. But we have a question that we like to close out with, and I'm just curious. Going to put you on the spot because that's what we're here to do anyway. If you could snap your fingers and tomorrow have one challenge solved, one problem solved for your community with your community, what would it be?
So, like, I think it's a chicken and an egg question. Sustainability all roots back to economic viability, and the things we want, the things the community wants right now, ultimately circles back to viability. So, certain people want more health services. Certain people want better recreation facilities. Certain people want transit. I think in 5 years is that we've got opportunities, and maybe this is personal for me with a 16 and a just about to be 18-year-old. We've got a place where the people who live here are confident that if their children wanted to continue their life here, that they wouldn't be sacrificing career opportunities or learning opportunities or innovation. And I think that's something in my path has been my choice to live and raise a family in my hometown has probably been accepted that you're giving up career opportunities or you're giving up like unique opportunities. So I hope between technology, I had this feeling that we're transitioning from urbanization to maybe a renewed place for rural parts of the world, that opportunity, whatever that opportunity is available. And then that makes small communities such as Gander a desirable place to live. And then that funds and sustains the niceties and the community things that we all want and demand.
Perfect. That's a great answer. Excellent. Well, Brad, thank you so much. Are there any other places that we should link to so that folks can learn more, get involved if they want?
We're transitioning to gander.ca, by the way. Yeah, I mean, I think that's primarily
Okay.
where it is.
Well, Brad, thank you so much for your time. This has been really exciting, a very good discussion. It's great to hear about Gander and your background and everything. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate the conversation.